Hey guys, Rose from Rebel Leader Academy here. I hope you guys can hear me. I'm testing out kind of a new setup today, so hopefully this goes well. Otherwise, I'm just gonna sit here talking to myself for a while, which is fine. So it's July. Welcome to July. This month, we're going to do a series around what it feels like to be a rebel when you don't really have a cause or a mission, what life sort of feels like. There's a lot of frustration that comes up with that. But what I want to start with today is talking about our identity as kind of this rebel nonconformist and how that shows up in the world or doesn't. And particularly what happens when we are trying to constantly fit in. So to give you an example from my life, let's go back to high school, right? That's kind of when we really start, middle school, we start forming our real sort of identity per se, getting into our cliques and all that kind of thing, getting to our social circles. And in high school, I found myself at a really interesting spot one day because I was in the hallway and I was thinking that I had one friend coming down who was kind of from like the badassy, druggy, rebel clique that sometimes I hung out with. And then on the other hand, I had somebody else that I was chatting with who was in one of my AP courses. You know, I was really good at academics, so I was in all of these sort of advanced courses with a bunch of really goody kind of people. You know, they were really on track with their lives. They knew what they wanted. They were all college bound and going to be doctors and lawyers and all that kind of thing. So when I was with the people in my AP classes, I was kind of one version of myself, right? Wasn't really one to like go around swearing or anything like that. Talked about very different sort of topics with them versus when I was with my more like badassy friends and I was just more exuberant, just a whole different person. And I remember thinking, oh shit, what am I gonna do when both of these people come at me at the same time? Because who am I going to show up as? Who am I going to be in this moment? And I kind of had a mini identity crisis. And then I realized in that moment that this could not be for my whole life. Whether it was going to be in a career or it was going to be, hey Richard, or it was going to be, you know, in my family, like I had to show up as one unified person. And that person is, of course, my more rebellious nature. Of course, I have the academic side, but it's really about showing up more nonconformist. And I know that a lot of people, as they go through this process into adulthood, they feel this need to conform because we have to conform when we're in our job. We have to wear certain clothes. We have to hide certain aspects of ourselves, not talk about certain things. And this becomes very, very problematic for people who at our core have a more rebellious nature to us. And the more we try to tamp that down and hide it, kind of the worse it becomes for ourselves. Because really, I mean, obviously there are people who are total on the rebel side and they get by in life just fine showing up as who they are. And then there are those who try to conform and conform and conform. And let's talk about what happens to them. So the first thing that people tend to notice when they are trying to be somebody that they're really not is a lack of energy. It takes a huge, tremendous amount of energy for us to uphold this kind of facade as we go about our day. And that starts from the minute we wake up from the clothes we put on. You know, the clothes we put on is a representation of who we are. And when we put on clothes that aren't really us or trying to be something else, like we walk around and we have this internal feeling of feeling off, right? It's not us. And so from the very beginning of the day, we start putting on this energy of like, all right, let me measure what I say. Let me measure who I'm going to interact with. Let me not tell them about certain parts of my weekend, maybe that were super fun that we just can't talk about because they wouldn't see that as who I am. And from work to, let's think about if you're a parent, right? This shows up a ton if you're a parent. You're trying to be this one image of yourself as a good mom, a good father, whatever the case may be. And there are certain aspects of yourself or how you go about your daily life that might not conform to the traditional way of showing up as a parent. So all throughout the day, we're having all of these conversations and things with people and feeling the need to, in the back of our minds, hold ourselves together, hold it down, don't curse. Oh, don't talk about that. Don't really be as opinionated about that thing as you actually are. So we end up at the end of the day fucking exhausted, like just exhausted and almost not knowing why. We're just like, not really sure what happened there. So that's number one, is you end up with this total lack of energy in all areas of your life and a lack of vibrancy. Number two is when that goes on for long enough, we start internalizing this feeling of not being good enough for who we are. So with our rebellious nature, we tend to have all kinds of different ideas. Like, we don't agree with a lot of people, like the way the majority of people think. We tend not to have those same beliefs because we're very good at defining our own core values within ourselves. So what ends up happening is that we're like, well, let's go back to the parent example. Well, I'm not showing up as that kind of parent, right? And this is what people quote a good parent shows up as, or who they tend to be. You know, they're the bake sale mom, let's say, or whatever the case. So you end up like looking at yourself from this view, holding yourself up to this image, this ideal that you're just not. And that doesn't make you a bad mom, let's say, or a bad father. It just makes you who you are. And you're going to show up as the parent that you would naturally show up at, and the values that you would naturally give to your children, which, yeah, they're going to be different than society's norms, but who the hell really cares? And that's something that you end up not valuing, whether it's in your workplace, who you show up as there, who you could show up as there, all of the things that you could question, all of the processes that you could change if you were allowed to show up, or allowed yourself rather to show up for who you really are. So deep down, we end up with this, I'm not good enough. I'm not a good enough parent. I'm not a good enough colleague. I'm not a good enough, only because you're trying to mask all of your actual natural talents, which are amazing. And we'll talk about that later. But today, first one is you're going to show up with a lack of energy. Second one is, over time, you're going to start internalizing this awful, awful feeling of not being good enough. And the more you internalize that, the more you actually put constrictions around your life and what you can do. And it's all self-imposed, unfortunately. Yeah, sure, society, you know, in the external, they reinforce what you quote should be, but it's all about you taking back that power and your control, and showing up as who you actually are. So this not good enough, this goes on and on and on for years, and then all of a sudden what happens is we end up in a place of deep frustration, deep anger. If you are kind of an extrovert, that anger and that depression ends up being externalized, and you end up in a lot of fights. You end up kind of in these self-sabotaging behaviors, whether it's in your personal relationships or your workplace. You end up going from job to job to job, for example, always trying to find like this happy place. And then you end up with severe depression. So we have anxiety, depression, and anger that goes along with that. So if you are more of an introvert, you end up internalizing that anger, and you end up going into full-on depression. So it's interesting because at our core, our rebellious nature is incredibly powerful. We like to show up, not necessarily be the center of attention, but we do like to show up with that sense of like, I can change things. Yeah, I know what the hell I'm doing. Yeah, I have these other ideas. And the more you kind of get into this cycle of not good enough and depression spiraling, you end up with this person that you look at and you're like, I don't even know who that is. Like, it's not me. I'm showing up as this other identity, and we end up at a breaking point. So I'm kind of sharing all of this because we don't have to end up at that breaking point if we can kind of backtrack and talk about, okay, great. So if I'm not going to show up as, you know, the goody-goody cake baking mom, or that, you know, really nice, controlled, refined in a suit colleague, or whatever the fuck we're trying to show up as, then who am I going to show up? And it's about transitioning into who you really are. Because the beautiful thing about it is that as you start to kind of undo all of that crap layering that's been on you probably since around middle school when you started building a clique and an identity, you start seeing that who you are actually is needed in every one of those environments. We can't, nor should we all be those goody-goody two-shoes. Because honestly, they don't change the world. They don't move us forward as a society. They just keep things complacent. They keep things status quo. So recognizing that your rebellious nature and that crazy identity in you that's always like, no, I'm not going to do that, or fuck that. No, why should I be doing it? Or why is it this way? And all that questioning that you naturally have in you is really, really, really needed. So to recap, what I want to say about showing up not as who you are and not allowing that like freaky side of you to actually flourish and be known and be seen is you end up first with a total lack of energy, complete lack of energy. Then you end up feeling in this I'm not good enough spiral. And then from there, if you are an extrovert, that ends up as anger and fights and all kinds of drama in your life. And if you're an introvert, it ends up as anxiety and depression, which of course, both of those things then trigger into physical health consequences. We start having heart problems, we start having anxiety and panic attacks. So this is a real issue that tends to happen for us. So I will be back on a Wednesday. Like I said, this month we are exploring the topic of what life is like to be a rebel without a cause, and what we can actually start doing about it. So if you liked this, please give me a comment. If you can relate to that story that I shared in the beginning about kind of being in that situation where you had two people who knew you sort of in two different ways and having this mini identity crisis, I'd love to hear about that. Or how it's showing up now. Like, what are you conforming to, whether it be at work or in your personal life? What are those things that trigger you and you feel like, oh, no, I don't want to do this, or I know who you guys want me to show up as, and it's just not going to happen. Or this shows up a lot actually as avoidance. So it's more like, yeah, like I could go to that party or event or thing, but then I'm going to have to be this person, and I just don't want to deal. I don't want to deal with having to hide. I don't want to deal with, having to put on the fake smile, or, deal with the pleasant conversations, or not be in a situation where I can speak up. Maybe it's about political views, religious views, whatever is important to you. So I'd love to hear about that. I will see you guys back here on Wednesday with another episode. Until then, love you guys. Thank you.